Joining me now from Washington, D.C., news editor for Rare Online and Daily Ledger contributor, Matt Purple. Matt, there is a poll right now on Drudge, and Scott Walker is walking away with it, excuse the pun, right now. That one is probably not as significant because it's unscientific. More significant, though, was a poll out of Iowa recently showing Walker indeed in front in that polling. So, is it Walker right now who's the odds-on favorite?
Yeah, and I was kind of wondering when the nomination was going to shift in his direction. I mean, not that he's come anywhere near winning it yet, but at least some of the public momentum should have gone that way, because I think Scott Walker represents a really nice go-between between the two sides. He's somebody who establishment Republicans find respectable enough. You know, he doesn't have any kind of frills about him like they think Rand Paul does. He's not a Fox News figure like, say, Ben Carson. But he's also appealing to conservatives. I mean, what he did with public sector unions, the way he took them on and defeated them in Wisconsin, became kind of a rallying call on the right, and many other governors ended up doing the same thing. He's something of a conservative folk hero, in addition to being somebody who's, you know, approved by the establishment. So he really is somebody who can bridge that gap. He's, I think, a very impressive candidate. The one thing that I think he may struggle with is right now he's tested in Wisconsin. You know, he's actually won re-election there three times in the past 4 years, which is hilariously impressive. Right. But the problem is, can he work outside the Midwest? We've all heard him speak before. He's a little bit laconic, a little bit slow. You know, he's not the most charismatic presence on a stage. You know, Chris Christie kind of puts him to shame in that department. So the one thing I would caution with him is, you know, we got to test him a little bit first. But in terms of, you know, the paper record, he seems like maybe even the candidate best suited to win the Republican nomination, I would say. Yeah,
and I think he has to do a little proving in terms of foreign policy, maybe a few trips to Israel and maybe to Asia. But let's face it. You know, he took a state that was floundering in red ink, and he fixed the budget. As you pointed out, he took on the unions, and he really established a name for himself in being able to fight a good fight. And, you know, I think that that's what's been missing for the Republican Party for many, many years.
Yeah, and let's go back to your point about foreign policy, because that's a good one, and I should have brought that up. Walker has kind of been a question mark on that subject for a while. There was a hint dropped, I think, when he had Mark Thiessen, a very hawkish former Bush administration official, ghostwrite his book, in essence. But really, he hasn't dropped too many other clues as to where he stands on foreign policy. When he was asked about the NSA, he said, well, I'm going to try to find a middle ground between Chris Christie and Rand Paul. Now he's come out and he said, I think just this past weekend, he said that he would consider putting boots on the ground when it came to ISIS in Syria. That is a very dramatic statement. That's something that's, you know, very much in opposition to what the American people think right now. And that's going to be, it kind of puts him, I think, on the stage within the mainstream of the rest of the Republican candidates, minus Rand Paul. So the kind of implication there, the very, I think, interesting implication, is that you may see a foreign policy debate on this Republican candidate stage that comes down to Rand Paul versus everybody else. Rand Paul versus Scott Walker, Ted Cruz, Chris Christie, even, you know, more fringe candidates like John Bolton and Lindsey Graham. He's going to be the only one carrying the water for the more restrained side. It'll be a very interesting setup when it happens.
Yeah, and I think he also carries with him an anti-Washington, D.C. perspective, and I think that can play a long way given the electorate and its, well, its anti-Washington, D.C. stance right now, when the majority of Americans, you know, don't like what's going on in Washington, D.C. Of course, that could work in Christie's favor, too, but he's in New Jersey. I think geography plays a part here. But when Mitt Romney bowed out last week, he pointed out that he thought the Republican candidates needs some new blood. And there is some new blood, including Scott Walker. But if you look at the senatorial folks, that would be Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, and Marco Rubio, I think that's what Mitt Romney, that's who he was directing those comments to. And if you look at Ted Cruz, I think he has all the hallmarks of a Ronald Reagan-type candidate, but he's got to, in my opinion, I think he's got to have one clear, concise message that he's got to beat over and over and over again, yet he's not doing it at this point.
I mean, the problem with Ted Cruz, I think, at this point is that he's going to come out and he's going to get tagged with a government shutdown. He's going to come out and he's going to get tagged with, you know, what his colleagues would see as some of the more extreme tactics that he's used when he's been in the Senate. Ted Cruz, I don't think, has an ideology problem so much. I think he's pretty much where the conservative base is at this point. he has more of a tactical problem. You know, there are going to be people who are going to get up on that stage and say, Senator, you advocated for shutting down the government. You got your wish. We got nothing out of it. And you can make a serious argument that Ken Cuccinelli lost in Virginia. Part of that what happened as a result of the shutdown. So he's going to have to overcome that, which is going to be, you know, a tough sell. I think he's a much tougher sell to the general electorate than he is to the conservative base. If he's going to have a chance, I think what he has to do is come out, I think, really as he did in that filibuster, which is articulately expressing conservative opinions, you know, saying it in a way that doesn't turn people off, that doesn't offend people. He can come off as a little arrogant, a little bit pompous sometimes. He's got to play that down. The nomination is certainly his if he wants it, but he has to jump through a few hoops right now. He has to mainstream himself a little bit more. And he's going to face, I think, opposition from somebody like Paul, who the two of them line up pretty evenly, except on foreign policy. And Paul is a little bit more, I think, genial, a little bit more, you know, good at slapping backs and kissing babies and the retail side of politics. So it'll be interesting to see if Cruz is able to find a niche. He's certainly one of the more... he's certainly one of the candidates to watch, I would say.
And I think Marco Rubio has an immigration problem that he's going to have to deal with for the conservative base of the Republican Party. Now, real quick, almost out of time here, Jeb Bush, Chris Christie, that would not be the new blood that Mitt Romney is talking about. I handicap Chris Christie. He's got a New Jersey problem. I don't think his record is that good in New Jersey. And I think for Bush has a Bush problem. I don't think people, both left and right, Republican and Democrat, want another Bush in the White House.
No, and it's not just the last name that it's a problem. I would say you strike off anybody who supports immigration reform at this point, especially after the Dave Brat race down in Virginia. I think the GOP has made up its mind on this. They don't want the snake oil immigration reform that the establishment GOP is peddling. And I think for Chris Christie, I think it's an issue of can he survive outside the Northeast? You know, can he, I've seen videos of him on stage, you know, screaming at Iowa voters before, and they're kind of like, you know, huh, what? So can he kind of bring that Northeast personality that he has, take it to maybe some of the more tranquilized parts of the country, the less emphatic parts of the country, and make it work? He's got a lot of establishment money behind him, though. I certainly think he has a good chance.
I think the Republicans can take advantage of there being a big and diverse field and use it to their advantage if they're smart, but at some point they have to come up with one cohesive message for voters in 2016. Matt, thanks for all that.